Good day, everyone. Today, we will be tackling the process of democratization in the Philippines, particularly on the description of its political system, the country profile, the political culture, political institutions, and political changes and developments, as well as its notable and confidential political leaders, together with their contributions or impact to the process and survival of democracy. We will also be looking at the challenges and issues that the Philippines faced during the process of democratization, as well as a comparative analysis between Philippines and Indonesia in terms of their democracy. Today's learning objectives are to describe and discuss the political system of the Philippines, especially its country profile, political culture, political institutions, and political changes and developments, tackle the notable leaders of the Philippines in their contributions or influence to the process of democratization, identify specific political issues and challenges of the Philippines and how it has affected the country's overall functioning, especially during the democratization process, and perform a comparative analysis between Philippines and Indonesia in terms of their democracy. So the first thing that we are going to tackle about the Philippines is its country profile. As you can see in this table, the Philippines is an archipelago and is a sovereign state located in Southeast Asia. It consists of 7,641 islands spreading to more than 300,000 square kilometers of territory, and it is divided into three main islands, namely Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. On 2017, the CIA recorded a total of 104,256,076 Philippine population. But as of 2020, the current population of the Philippines is 110,145,169 as of Saturday, November 21, 2020, based on Worldmeter elaboration of the latest United Nations data. The Philippines is a unitary presidential constitutional republic with the president as the head of both the state and the government. The Philippines was able to claim its full sovereignty in the year 1987 from the United States. Its current president is President Rodrigo Duterte, who held office since 2016. The Philippines' official languages are Filipino and English. So there are a lot of ethnic groups that exists in the Philippines. 28.1% are Tagalog, 13.1% are Cebuanos, 9% consist of Ilocanos, 7.6% are Bisaya, 7.5% are Hiligaynon Ilonggo, 6% are Bicolanos, 3.4% are Warais, and the other 25.3% are a mix of different ethnic groups. Its regime type is defective democracy, and the cabinet type is a multi-party coalition. Moving on, we have the political culture and dynamics, which Montiel divided into two categories. These are the subjective components of Filipino political culture and the objective components of Filipino political culture. The subjective components refers to the psychological aspect, although they do not pertain to specific individuals but to interacting groups. The first one is ideology-inspired, shared interpretations of political events. This is a Filipino political culture wherein political events are given different or symbolical meanings. The second one are shared mental scripts, which refers to the Filipino political culture wherein Filipinos believe that if someone helps a candidate during the election, that certain person will be given a position or land a job in the government with the help of the politician if ever that politician will win. The third is negative emotions towards out-group members. This refers to the negative perception of a faction of political party wherein they are constantly thinking that the dominant party is scheming something against them. So basically, they have this negative perception towards the dominant party because they are threatened. Now, the fourth one is collective memories. This refers to a collective memory that a group of people have regarding a specific event in the past that gave them a traumatic experience. For example, those who suffered the consequences of the martial law are haunted by their experiences of the past. And the last one is religious beliefs. So basically, this refers to the religious beliefs and values that politicians incorporate to the laws and how they govern the people within the Philippines. Now, let's move on to the objective components, which refers to political culture that includes directly observable political practices, language, and artifacts. So the first one is political practice. This is basically making good relationships with politicians so that they can benefit from them and vice versa. So as an example, if a mayor invites a congressman to be his son's godfather, it can literally mean that the mayor just wants the congressman to be his son's godfather. Or it could also connote that the certain mayor is expecting the congressman to help him in his future endeavors and vice versa. The second one is political language. Political language refers to the words or phrases that contain latent meaning, just like the political practice. So, for example, if someone says, "Don't challenge me," it can literally mean that the person doesn't want to be challenged. Or it could also connote that the person who is speaking is threatening the receiver of the message so as not to challenge him because he is powerful or something like that. And the last one is political artifact. Well, political artifacts refer to items or symbols of certain politicians, wherein if someone or if a group of persons have that certain item or a certain color, maybe that person or those group of people will be perceived as supporting the politician that symbolizes the item or the color. For example, if a person wears a yellow ribbon in his clothes, that person will be perceived as or will be seen as supporter of the Aquinos. So we are now in the political institutions or the branches of the government. So the branches of the government, we have here the legislative branch, which is authorized to make laws, alter and repeal them through the power vested in the Philippine Congress. We have the executive branch, which carries out the laws. So the executive branch is composed of the president and the vice president, who are elected by direct popular vote and serve a term of 6 years. Then we have the judicial branch, which evaluates the law. So the judicial branch holds the power to settle controversies involving rights that are legally demandable and enforceable. Then we also have the military. So the military, during the process of democratization, especially during the Marcos regime, the military played a big role during the Marcos regime because, as we have known already, Marcos declared martial law in order to protect his position because he was not sure or he was afraid that he may not be able to win for the third time, so he implemented martial law. And he became very dependent to the military. Moving on to the notable leaders and confidential leaders, I have included for the first one is Ramon Magsaysay, then Corazon Aquino. We also have Ferdinand Marcos, and lastly, Rodrigo Duterte, who is the current president of the Philippines. As for Ramon, his contribution is that he tried to restore the Hukbalahap's faith in democracy because the Huks were doubting the democracy which was just starting in the Philippines during that time. So he used the AFP to ensure that the 1951 elections were conducted fairly, and indeed, they were alleged to have been the fairest in the Philippines' electoral history. Now, for Corazon Aquino, she represented the restoration of elite democracy after 14 years of dictatorship. Overall, the concept elite democracy might be seen as a negative concept or might be seen as negative, but still, it gave way for the survival of democracy in the Philippines and prevented it from totally collapsing. Now, for Ferdinand Marcos, he is one of the confidential leaders of the Philippines. He became the president, or he was the first president to be re-elected in what became the most violent and fraudulent elections in the country's history. Marcos is also the one who argued that a democratic system would not allow him to develop the new society he envisaged or he envisioned for the Philippines. And for him, the practice of democracy was energy consuming and time wasting. He said that he preferred he preferred authoritarian rule over democracy because it allowed him to make changes he wanted without having to endure the procedures brought about by democracy. As for Rodrigo Duterte, he is also one of the confidential leaders of the Philippines because of a lot of different reasons. As we all know, his war on drugs led to violation of human rights in the sense that extrajudicial killings were rampant when he implemented the war on drugs. He was also bashed because for the reason of the shutting down of ABS-CBN, which is the biggest media corporation in the Philippines, saying that what he did was a violation of press freedom. Now, here are the issues and challenges of the democratization process. So, one of the issues was that democracy in the Philippines was only democratic in form, borrowing as many American practices as it could, but autocratic in practice. Well, another issue is that many features of American democracy are ill-suited to poor and unstable and divided countries, especially that in the Philippines, the elites dominated the political processes through a mixture of clientelism and coercion. Another issue is that the Philippine democracy was threatened by the communist-inspired Hukbalahap movement because, as what I have said a while ago, the Huks were doubting the democracy in the Philippines, thinking that democracy was only beneficial for the elites, which is partially true because they were the ones who dominated the political processes and they were able to do whatever they want, which is basically something that would benefit them and is in favor of them. So the next one is that democracy was abrogated during the Marcos regime because Marcos himself, as we all know, he implemented martial law in order to retain his position as president. And he also abolished democratic institution because, as what I've said, he preferred an authoritarian rule over democratic processes. Because for him, democratic processes are energy consuming and time wasting. And lastly, another challenge is that democracy in the Philippines is fragile. It is fragile in the sense that it is defective. Although democratic processes such as elections are present in the Philippines, democracy is not really that stable and it could collapse anytime. Now you can see here that democracy in the Philippines, or the Philippines, ranked 54th in the Democratic Index of 2019 and Indonesia ranked 64th. So this ranking is based on 5 categories, which are electoral process and pluralism, the functioning of government, political participation, political culture, and civil liberties. So the Philippines ranked 54th with a score of 6.64 and Indonesia ranked 64th with a score of 6.48%. So both countries were categorized as flawed democracies based on the Democratic Index. So based on this, we cannot certainly say that the Philippines is more democratic than Indonesia, but based on these rankings, It is safe to say that the Philippines' democracy is better than Indonesia based on the 5 categories that I have mentioned a while ago. Thank you guys for listening, and a much more detailed discussion of this will be in the written report.